Built for builders, from beginners to pros, this is where great backyards begin. Welcome to the Ultimate Deck Podcast, your source for backyard building tips, product breakdowns, and pro advice from the front lines of the industry. Here are your hosts, Shane Chapman and Wade Laurent.
Welcome back to the Ultimate Deck Podcast with your favorite deck nerds, Wade and Shane.
I don't know that I've ever been called a nerd.
Oh, you have. Maybe not to your face.
Yeah, that's too bad.
Sorry about that.
They should call me.
Today we're talking about how much space should be left between your deck boards when you're installing your deck. Is there a universal answer to this?
Nope.
Oh, I thought we were going to get out of here nice and quick today.
I don't think so.
Okay.
What are you using for deck boards?
Right. That's why this question is here. Okay, let's start. How are we going to do this? You want to start with wood?
Might as well.
Let's go through. We'll talk about pressure treated. We'll talk about cedar. We'll talk about composite, and we'll talk about PVC. Is that fair?
Yeah, because, you could do like softwood, hardwood, but sure.
Sure. So start with pressure treated. How much space are you leaving between the deck boards when you're installing pressure treated decking?
So I'm probably leaving 1/16 of an inch. And the reason I'm doing that is that I would use a Camo Protect tool and I would fasten the boards down, but I would use the 1/16 spacer.
Sure.
And it's the only reason I'm using the 16th is I want those fasteners on the shoulder of the boards, not on the top of the boards, to help reduce the amount of slivers. And it's just a little bit cleaner look.
Yeah.
If I was going to face screw pressure treated deck boards down, those are slam tight and screwed down. It is like bang down.
Sure.
And then moving on.
So you're not going to get an argument from me. You normally wouldn't, but it's a podcast and people love this. So I'm going to argue it. But no, I generally agree as well. I think that was the perfect answer is the 1/16 with that tool. I think is awesome. Some people slam tight if they're face screwing for sure.
Yeah.
The couple caveats to this, I suppose, is it kind of depends on how dry your pressure treated lumber is when you get it. And often it's fairly wet. And so that's when it's like, install it tight because it's going to shrink and you're going to end up with 1/4 inch gaps if you go 16th inch. I've seen some scenarios where that's not necessarily the case. If the lumber is a little bit drier, but if it's installed without ventilation on like ground level,
oh boy,
I've seen the opposite happen where they installed it fairly tight. And because it's a very humid environment and it doesn't have ventilation, the boards swell and then they buckle up.
Right.
And so you have to be aware of install tight, assuming you got good airflow and those boards are going to dry.
Now you're running relief cuts down the middle.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. My aunt in Medicine Hat, her deck, she has a deck. They bought a house and it was like, they didn't build it, but people had done it. And the boards were tenting everywhere because they were expanding and pushing up and it was just ground level. And then, it rains and it stays humid underneath that all the time. So the boards never had a chance to dry out and they ended up expanding up. So if you happen to get your boards and they're bone dry, then put a little bit of a gap in there. You might want to do an 1/8 to be safe.
Absolutely.
But if you're we're in a dry climate too in Saskatchewan and it's windy and it's hot and sunny and nothing's expanding here. So pretty tight for pressure treated is generally what we say. Cedar.
Yeah. I would probably space that just a little bit more. I'd go 1/8 inch on the cedar, similar fastening system.
Same system, different tool.
The only reason I do that is that cedar is typically a little bit drier when we get it. It doesn't have that treatment in it, so it does shrink back a little bit here, but not as much as pressure treated is. So I think something that people really struggle to understand is how wood and composite change and where they expand and contract. And so wood is really stable lengthwise, and composite is really stable widthwise, right? And so your spacing for wood, you need to adjust that widthwise because that's the part that's going to move around the most.
Yeah. I agree. 1/8 inch on cedar. Both cedar and treated, which is typically, we just talked about this last episode, spruce, pine, fir, yellow pine sometimes, hemlock sometimes. Or redwood is another one I guess we could be talking about, but they're all heat treated and typically kiln dried. The difference is the cedar, once it's been dried, then goes to market.
Right.
Little piggy.
Yeah.
Gets off to market.
Right away.
Yes. The SPF.
It's the first one in the market.
The SPF gets dried very similarly, except it then goes to a treater.
Yeah.
And then they re-soak it.
Makeup on.
In a vat of chemical and pressurize it and soak it in the lift still. So it's all bundled together and strapped so they pressurize this chemical and force it into it. And it's 99% water, this chemical.
Yeah.
And then they take it out of the vat and they let it drip dry and then they tarp it and they send it to the lumberyard. And so it's wet very wet still. And it takes a long time to dry because it's stacked in a lift of 162 boards, and there's no airflow until it gets delivered to your house, and then it gets some airflow, and then it dries out, and then it shrinks and whatever else. So yeah, cedar 1/8 inch, because it's not wet when it comes to you. It still has a moisture content. It still probably will shrink a little bit, and that 1/8 turns into a 3/16. Perfect.
Yep. Yeah, and then hardwoods. So hardwoods are coming. They're typically pretty dry. If you're doing like a red blau or an ipe or a kumaru, whatever, those are pretty stable. So they can come either with a solid edge or a grooved edge. If it's a grooved edge, I'm probably using a camo fastener or what are those metal ones?
Maybe a clip or something.
Ipe clip or something Fastmaster, always like Tiger Claw. Or those are pretty good as well. Like a TCG clip in there is really good. Those ones again are really stable widthwise, and if they do move, they're going to move lengthwise a little bit. So, hardwoods, I'm probably doing just a 3/16 clip.
Yep.
So,
yeah, I would 3/16 max. You might even talk me into doing 1/8 on those ones, because they, in my experience here at least, they can shrink a little bit. Right? But again, if you're summer humid, probably go tighter, probably go a little bit wider. And if you're summer dry, probably go a little bit tighter.
Yeah.
I know that the main experience I had with installing ipe, man, we laid those boards out and they baked in the sun for damn near a month before we installed them, and they still shrunk.
Yes.
So we got them on the deck.
Yeah.
Composite.
I just really like the look of a 3/16.
I think that's the money.
And it's so silly to say that. This is probably when you called me a nerd, actually. This is probably this conversation right here.
You're feeling out right now.
But I just don't, the Trex clips are a 1/4 inch, and Trex's warranty wants you to use their clips to have a 1/4 inch space between the boards to allow.
I think they allow 3/16 now.
Did they?
Yeah, they do now, which is a good call.
That's great. Probably because they watched some other company live and die by their fastener and was like, whoa, we better not do this.
Yeah.
We should allow people to use whatever fastener they want.
Well, and ironically, I think they've always allowed, well, maybe the Trex ones are different, but they always allowed the TCG tire claw clip as an approved fastener, but they had their version of it, right? They had the Trex, and I don't know if that one maybe was a 1/4 inch.
I thought it was slightly wider, but
anyway, yeah, I think that 1/4 inch is a little too wide.
It makes sense to me when you end up on a property that has a lot of trees around it and they're getting a ton of downfall, just leaves and sticks and whatever.
Yeah.
That 1/4 inch gap is actually pretty good because it does allow slightly more product to pass through.
Yeah.
And if it doesn't pass through, it just sits there and then accelerates the rot on your joist.
Yeah.
If you haven't protected that.
Right.
But I don't know. 3/16 is a number for me.
Most people like the tire look. 3/16 is a number for me too, because I think 1/8 looks really nice on composites, but to your point, nothing falls through on 1/8. So now you're sweeping your deck off, you're picking pebbles out of the cracks.
Pressure washing.
3/16 allows most seeds and most debris to fall through without looking too wide. Yeah. You don't have to worry about the expansion and contraction widthwise on composite decking. I know the odd person might argue that and be like, yeah, it does. And it's like, it's minuscule.
Sure. It does, but it's not enough. You need to factor in.
So it's more about the airflow and allowing shit to fall through is what that's really about. Now, when you get to PVC, does your answer change, or is it same?
Still 3/16 width for me on that one.
Okay. Yeah. I know that sometimes you remove the airflow concern at PVC or non-organic decking.
Yeah.
And so it becomes strictly about what's going to pass through. So I think 3/16 is probably still the right one. But if somebody wanted to do 1/8 on a PVC deck because that's what they wanted to do, I'd be like, sure, go for it. But if they wanted to do 1/8 on a composite deck, I'd be like, I don't think that's a great idea. You need that little bit more airflow flowing through that.
Yeah, it certainly depends what's happening, right? If it's a sunroom but anyways,
yeah,
there's a zillion factors in that, but
certainly.
Yeah, I just think any of the decks that I have seen when they're a finished product and everything's done, the picture frame is on and you left 3/16 between the end of your deck board and the picture frame and you got 3/16 in all your spaces and like that, and you walk around, the whole thing is all 3/16. It's just like, that's sick, the right one. That's it's, you don't see the fasteners below. You can tell they're there, but you can't really pick them out. You can't see the size of the screw head and all that stuff. And you go to 1/4 inch, you can. Yeah. You just see it.
And everything we talked about here, it's like the clips do the work for you. Like the clip is going to determine. People sometimes be like, what should I do? And it's like, they've got a bucket of clips there. It's like, you don't get to choose. You put the board tight and the clip decides how wide that is. And and it's often 3/16 or a 1/4 inch on most clips.
Yeah.
And then on the wood decks, like I said, you mentioned the Camo Marksman tool. Great tool for putting down softwood decking. GRK has one now too. I can't remember what they call it. The Deck Pro, something. Very similar tool. The idea being that the screws go on the side of the board so you don't see them, and those will dictate your spacing as well. So I don't know what the GRK one has for options, but the Camo Marksman, you can do 1/16. There's a 1/8 one that's kind of an AZEK branded one. There's a 3/16 option, and technically there's a 0 gap one too, but it's like the handheld one that's like not nearly as efficient and hard to find.
And they have narrow board too, so I just prefer the Camo one. Those tails are interchangeable, so you could buy one gun and then you can have a 1/16 or 1/8.
Yeah, great little tool.
Yeah, it's fantastic. So,
so
the only trick to getting a 3/16, the only board I can think of where I would use a different fastener is with TimberTech, and they have the shoulder, like the shoulder on the bottom of the deck board is actually recessed back a little wee bit from what the top is. And so I used to always recommend using the Trex clip on the TimberTech ones because it was a 1/4 inch space, but the boards were slightly narrower, and then you ended up with a 3/16 gap. And I always thought that looked better too. So.
Yeah. And then to that point, little nuances from some decking. Sometimes you have decks where you have to use different clips to make it all work.
Oh man.
Sometimes you find boards that are like, well, the 12-inch boards are 5.5 inches exactly, but the 16-inch ones are 7/16, 5 and 7/16. How do I manage this? Because they're meeting in the middle and they're not lining up. It's like, okay, well, maybe you're going to use 1/4 inch spacers over here and 3/16 over here to make that all work. But
yeah, that's a tricky one. That's for another
slight tip. End of the day.
Yeah.
Anyways, hopefully that helps answer your questions about the space you should leave between your deck boards. Till next week. Peace.